Another leak from the Trump administration. A group of government climate scientists have leaked a draft report on climate change to the New York Times. They're claiming that they feared its suppression by the Trump administration. Of course, there was no such evidence of suppression and that it was planned, and the leaked draft was almost identical to an earlier draft that had been public for months. And meanwhile, a new study has an odd suggestion for reducing climate change. Tucker recently spoke to a documentary filmmaker about it.
Well, scientists have a new plan for how you can save the climate. Don't have children. Just stop right now. Don't even think about it. A new study from Lund University in Sweden says the single best way to cut your carbon footprint, assuming you want to, is simply to refuse to reproduce. Deleting some humans from existence, they say, saves far more carbon than, I don't know, being a vegetarian, riding a bike to work, not boarding an airplane. Josh Fox is the director of the anti-fracking documentary Gasland and the newly released film Awake, A Dream from Standing Rock. He is an environmental activist, and he joins us tonight. Josh, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here, Tucker.
So, not having children, that's the message. It seems like a sort of a tough message to deliver.
I think that's a bit of a misrepresentation. I think the study was saying that governments are saying we should recycle, we should change our light bulbs, we should do all these sort of consumer habits, and this study was comparing those sort of very minimal efforts to curtail climate change with other things like not flying, being a vegetarian, not having a car, and yes, having fewer children. It didn't say don't have children. It said, you know, having fewer children and having family planning, which means you have your children maybe later in life, would be something that would reduce carbon emissions per family. That's what the study says.
You know, if you follow this to its logical conclusion, you wind up telling Africa not to have so many kids because all the countries with the highest birth rates are in Africa. Niger's 1, Mali's 2, Burkina Faso's in there. So basically, are you willing to say to Africa, hey, you have too many kids, there are too many African kids?
No, that's a very illogical conclusion, because the study doesn't say African children are causing lots of carbon emissions. African children are actually causing very, very few carbon emissions. What is causing carbon emissions, by and large, are the countries of the first world, the countries of the West, China, India, Europe. Those are the countries that have skyrocketing carbon emissions, which are causing the climate change problem. But I would agree with you. I think that the problem with saying things like, this is your individual responsibility, you must stop driving, you must have fewer kids, you must change your light bulbs, is crazy, because there's no individual solution for climate change, right? There are ways that we can be more responsible citizens, absolutely. But what I would suggest is that that's like running into a burning inferno of a building with a thimbleful of water, throwing it out the water and going, woo, I did something. That's the problem here. There's a con afoot, which is that individuals have to take on all this guilt and all this responsibility, when in fact it's governments and major corporations that are responsible for climate change. It's been very clear that there are just 100 companies, 100 companies are responsible for 71% of climate change emissions. It is those companies which should stop reproducing, not children. So I agree with your basic premise that this is a little bit out of whack.
Very quick things. So the only country to take this policy and enact it on a large scale is China, which limited reproduction to 1 child per family for decades. That's also the biggest polluter in the world. So,
well, but they didn't do that because of climate change. But,
well, they didn't, but
that's misleading. Tucker, can I ask you a question? Do you understand the science on climate change? I mean, do you understand?
You ought to have fewer kids. I understand some of the science.
Do you understand the science on climate change? I mean, look, Tucker, science dictates everything that we do in our society. Science means that climate change is real. Science means that fracking pollutes groundwater. Science means that this television works, that this works, that cars work. Science presumably says that underneath your hair there's a brain behind those eyes. Of course, I haven't seen it. Science would tell us that there aren't a bunch of hamsters up there or a patch of straw.
I'm sorry.
I mean, although you're not really using your brain right now. What I am saying to you, Tucker, to make these kinds of false arguments about what the scientists are doing.
It's hilarious. No, let me just say this. Just back up 1 second.
So, Tucker, I asked you a question, you haven't answered it. I asked you a question. I'm a journalist as well. Do you understand what the science is telling us about climate change? Because this is what's very, very important. Well, I find it remarkable. I went out and talked to a lot of millennials. I talked to millennials about this question. I said, do you have an opinion about whether or not you should have children respective to climate change? And almost every one of them said, yes, I worry about this enormously. I worry about the future that my children will have. I mean, look, most Americans, and I've gone all across America to talk about extractive industry.
Right. You're not winning anything over with this.
I do think it's important that people care about the future for their children. I really do, Tucker.
Everybody cares about the future for their children. I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
Would you deny that our society is based on science? Medicine is based on science. Media is based on science. All the things that we have to say are based on science. What the science is telling us is that climate change is going to create a situation which is very, very dangerous and difficult for civilization to endure. Climate change will raise sea levels to the point to which it swamps all of our major cities.
Can I ask you a question, or are you going to continue with this stuff? Let me just ask you a really simple question. When you
you still haven't answered my question to you, which is, do you understand
behind climate change? I guess not all of it. I'm not a scientist. No, I don't fully understand it.
So do you understand
I know that
what
you
the
don't
science
either. I
is
don't
telling
know that
us about
anybody
climate
fully
change?
does.
Do you understand how dire it is? I find it absolutely amazing.
You're too obnoxious to talk to, unless you just answer one simple question.
Okay, hold on, stop.
Let's ask you a question, okay?
Ask the question.
You're giving me these like general bromides about climate change.
Go ahead, say what you're saying.
When you say that climate change is destroying the world and it's the thing that we should worry about most, and then you say simultaneously it's not really dependent upon our individual choices, aren't you giving a pass to some of the big individual polluters? If I say I really care about climate change and I fly
choices
around,
that matter. It's group actions that matter.
It doesn't matter if you fly in a private plane.
Millennials, who are by and large the people who are of childbearing age right now. Now you're not letting me talk, so I'm just going to talk. Millennials who are of childbearing age right now, our #1 issue is climate change, because they know that they're going to inherit an incredibly unstable world. The United Nations predicts that we will have 1 billion
This is actually too stupid. I'm going to bring this to a close. I'd love to have a conversation with you, but you're like,
this is instability. This is
like every Hollywood
this is profound,
dopey guy invoking science to like
listen,
get
Tucker, I'm just trying to answer your question. Listen, I really want to be civil with you, because I'm interested
being civil.
in breaking
I'm just too frustrated
your audience.
because. All right.
No.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining.